Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning. And I believe we have found a timely topic. Well, it's kind of easy with a topic like forgiveness. It's probably always timely because it's always difficult. Would you agree? Feel free to chat in the chat box if you agree or disagree with any of my statements. I don't promise to be able to see all those chats, but my belief is that forgiveness is always a timely topic. And in December, I often will focus. Our UU tradition has a number of sources. Some of them are pagan and earth-centric sources. Some of them are humanist teachings that prize evidence above mythology. And some of those sources are our Jewish and Christian roots. The Unitarian and Universalist traditions were first Christian traditions before they merged and became this wonderful practice-based, justice-based, caring-based tradition that they are today. So often in December, because like I mentioned on Thanksgiving, I'm in this mood of aligning with cultural momentum. And so even though there are numerous different holidays in December, if you look around, the culture is going, hey, Christmas, it's Christmas, and we're supposed to say happy holidays, not supposed to. I don't like that, supposed to, but I like to say happy holidays because I like to include others. And I'm a Buddhist over here celebrating pagan Yule all season. But I always, during December personally, I feel really informed by these sort of Christian influences on our culture and these Christian influences on our Unitarianism and Universalism. And so sometimes I feel like that's a great moment to take a look at even some of these kind of historical Unitarian and Universalist contemplations and knowings and thoughts. And today, we're going to be focusing a bit on some principles from Universalism. Often during this season, because the big culture at large is very Christian influenced, and so there's this Christ Mass holiday, and often I'll reread in December one of my favorite Unitarian tracts called Unitarian Christianity. But this week, this month, I'm feeling very Universalist inspired. And this has to do with our study of forgiveness. Well, why? Because the Universalists were a really cool group, and one of their main points where they sort of diverged from some of the other Christian traditions was they felt that God was too cool, God was too loving to take some people and just predestine them to be punished forever. Their whole thing, they looked at what the other churches were teaching, and they were saying, like, a lot of the churches out there still today, you'll say, well, some people, we're supposed to love them, but you gotta know that God wants to roast them on the barbecue for infinite time. Do you want, after you die, smoking or non-smoking? That's your choice. And the Universalists of old looked at this and they were like, bro, that doesn't meet with my values. I think they said it exactly like that. They were like, bro, it doesn't meet with my values, Calvin. Like, let's get with the program. And what they did, one of the reasons why we are the inheritors of the Unitarians and the Universalists, the Unitarians did this with the idea of the Trinity. They didn't vibe with that. And what it made them do was look through the Bible with a critical eye. Instead of just taking what tradition had handed down, they said, well, how do we work this out with the evidence of our senses? Does the text, is it congruent or does it contradict themselves? The Universalists did the same thing, but with the doctrine of universal love. Their whole thing was God is universally loving, and they found scriptures that spoke to that. And so they said, look, if God's universally loving, then that contradicts this other stuff that you say he's sometimes unforgiving. Sometimes he just, you were so naughty that God will never love you again. They said, what's a euphemism for what I was about to say? I call nonsense. I call malarkey on that So we're going to play a little inspired by Universalism, and we're going to talk today about forgiveness. This also may be a timely topic because I hope, is it over yet, the election cycle? Um, did we manage to finish it? It's like almost. But one aspect, episode 1 of the elections, maybe episode 2 of a 4-episode series, has finished itself. And I don't know if you have heard, but some of the liberals I know have heard cries for, well, now it's over and be civil and be kind, and then a lot of the time I'm hearing them respond, oh yes, let me show you some tweets that you put out 4 years ago and how kind you were. Suck it up, buttercup. Oh yes, good old American civility. That's right. If you don't like it, leave. Go to one of those, I have to censor the president's words, bleep countries that you love so much. An example of kindness. And so there may be calls for forgiveness out there in the good wide world. And then I think some of us in a UU congregation or a sermon, like we resonate with some aspects of forgiveness. Some aspects of forgiveness, like, well, yeah, like those universalists, like, I think love is cool. Love is epic. And then there are other aspects of forgiveness, quote unquote, that don't quite sit right with us. Forgiveness may be being used as a blame and shame tactic. Forgiveness may be used to absolve abusers of abuse. And we use this same word with its spiritual connotations to make all sort of muddy situations that just cloud the issue rather than bring more clarity. So my hope today was that chatting about forgiveness, contemplating forgiveness together might bring us some clarity that then we can be sources of in our wider communities. So good old Christian values. Okay, let me just check these notes, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Yeah, so we're letting go of original sin. This is one of those big universalist things. We're letting go of this idea of original sin. And they actually thought of original grace. Instead of original sin, they thought of original grace. And this is a big inspiration for our first Unitarian Universalist. That's why we say UU, because by the time you get to Universalist, you're tongue-tied. Our first UU principle, which is honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person or every being. If you're a Buddhist like me, you say it that way. It comes from this idea that everybody has some divine worth. We're worthy of grace, of love, worthiness of love. All right, and then, but how do we practice this? Well, let's have a talk about it. I have 2 reasons that I think forgiveness is problematic. If you're on my Facebook, you may have saw I did a Facebook Live the other day where the title actually was "Forgiveness is Stupid." But because we're in church this morning on the Church of the Interwebs, I'm going to say forgiveness is problematic. Forgiveness is problematic. And my 2 reasons are, first, it's not very well defined. Forgiveness, now I'm putting it in quotes because here's this word, forgiveness, and then I'm not sure we know what we mean. And when people use this word on us, sometimes it's often a moving target. It changes meanings depending on how they're trying to manipulate you. In the Webster's Dictionary, I did what a lot of public speakers do, and I looked up, well, the definition of forgiveness from the Webster's is, let's see if I can even put it in your chat box for you here on the Zoom. I'm gonna try, we'll see if it works. Let's see. Hey, all right. So we have definition 1, to cease to feel resentment against an offender, to pardon or forgive one's enemies. And number 2 is to give up resentment or claim to requital. Give up resentment or claim to requital, to forgive an insult, to grant relief from payment, or forgive a debt. So we've got 2 very different, to simplify it here for myself, two very different meanings. One is like, okay, I'm giving up resentment, and we're going to talk about resentment later, but basically it means a feeling of ill will, right? And a lot of us, I think, at least we we may not feel capable of it at all times, but we have kind of a value of not carrying ill will in our hearts. But then there's this whole other meaning which says all debts are cleared. And that's all wrapped up in what we may mean when we say this word forgiveness. So, to be totally clear myself, I think the only time we should be using that second definition, like maybe the only time we should use forgiveness as a word, is when we're talking about the student loans of frontline health professionals in 2020. Any outstanding student loans of somebody working in a hospital, forgiveness, debt forgiveness. But someone who has like shouted racist and homophobic tweets and rants into the world, and then they say, hey, I thought you liberals were forgiving. Just why can't you forgive? Perhaps we should throw the word out entirely because the meaning is too muddy. All right, so this is my first problem with forgiveness. The meanings are all mixed up. Are we merely letting go of resentment, or are we saying that there's no more need for accountability, that there's no longer any debt? I believe, as I bet you do, these are very different things. The second problem I see with forgiveness is that it's all wrapped up in a dualistic paradigm of punishment versus forgiveness. It's the old false, you know, how I love to find false dichotomy fallacies, you know, and here are your only two dumb choices. You can either be totally absolved or you can be punished like the God of old that the Universalists didn't like so much. And in that, there's a notion in this old paradigm that like there's good people and bad people. There's the kind and there's the deplorable sinners who must burn. There's one side or another. And this idea of forgiveness is actually all wrapped up in this dualistic paradigm that you can be all good or all bad. Not only that, but I think in our hearts, it's actually instinctual. We'll get into it in a minute. Um, we we have kind of built in, that's why Don't Get Fooled Again was the prelude. I think we actually have that slogan kind of built into our instinctual primate brain. You know, as former President George W. Bush famously said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you don't get fooled again. Oh, he was quoting the song. Okay, I get it. I understand now. I apologize for how I looked at that quote 10, 12, however many years ago that was. So anyway, we have this instinct like, don't get fooled again. But then culturally, many of us have been taught that when little Johnny hits you and you're crying, all Johnny has to do is say you're sorry. And then, do you accept Johnny's apology? You know, and somehow, if you don't accept his apology, then you're the shameful one. You're the sinner now if you don't grant forgiveness. So we're all mixed up, I think, as let me look at my gallery view and you can tell me if you agree. As human beings, I think we're maybe all mixed up, especially around forgiveness. We've got all of these religious overlays about the shoulds and the shames, and then we've got all of this primate instinct that's trying, and those are often in direct opposition. And then rarely do we get to sit back and think rationally or open-heartedly about the situation at all. So that's what I hope to do with you here today. All right, so main problem. Forgiveness is an ill-defined term. So what I would like to do is see if we can disentangle some of what we might mean or hope for when we say forgiveness. And I think there are three different meanings, positive meanings that we may be looking for when we say forgiveness. These are repair, closure, and compassion. Let me even type these in: repair, closure, and compassion. And like I said, except for student loan debt, I think perhaps culturally we should just throw away the word forgiveness altogether and maybe focus on repair, closure, and compassion alone. Let's get started, shall we? First one, repair. So repair can be what sometimes stands in the way of quote unquote forgiveness. And as you probably know, but I'm here to reaffirm you, in some cases it should. We're often told that we should forgive because then we'll be the bigger person or somehow more morally developed. But there's a reason for our rage. So later we'll contrast rage with resentment, but there's a reason for our rage. Now, you may know me. With an introvert's nervous system and certain aspects of my upbringing, I tend to be a little conflict averse. My normal Sunday message might sound like, hey, rage, it's not that great. Today, I'm going to give you a different message, which is that rage is important. Wait a minute, is this church? And did he say he was going to talk about Christmas stuff? And now he said forgiveness is stupid and rage is important? That's right, forgiveness is stupid and rage is important. Oh gosh, I hope you stay on the line and hear what else. Don't walk away just with that. There's a reason I'm saying such things. Okay, so why is rage important? Well, I was listening to a great NPR podcast, which is called Hidden Brain. And you might want to listen to that if you enjoy such things. And one recently was called The Logic of Rage, The Logic of Rage. So you can listen to that on your own. But one of the stories that the host tells is how, let me look at your faces for rapport here, even though it messes up my video editing for later. It makes more work. You know how when you're merging on the freeway and then there's this little merge and you're all everybody who's a UU gets over early, right? And then there's one well-meaning person in their deepest heart who in their Tesla and they cut in front. Have you ever experienced that? Okay. Road rage, just a dash of, I see your inherent worth and dignity, but gosh darn it, I want to run you off the road. Right, I hope you can relate, otherwise I'm going to sound like I need to be defrocked or something like that. But so the host is talking about how they'll do this thing where they get so mad that then they'll slow and speed up their car just enough to block that person from getting in. Have you ever done this? I, as a trained warrior protector of society, have done this. And what was so wonderful and refreshing is that they then, if I'm remembering the episode right, they then had a psychological insights about how that's actually a socially functional evolutionary development in band-based primates like Homo sapiens. Because if you let antisocial narcissists just get away with stuff all the time, then you actually get a society with more antisocial narcissists. I did a sermon on this a while ago, there's research. What's the percentage of psychopaths in the population? It's pretty small, and it stays small because if you get too many, people get, the culture at large gets wise to the tricks of narcissists and psychopaths, and they get better and better at shutting that down. And then psychopaths don't find mates, don't find meaningful employment, and then the amount of psychopaths in the population goes back down. It's an interesting little primate evolutionary tactic. It's kind of cool. So rage is actually an aspect of this tactic. When on the freeway, I'm gonna slow down and get there a little slower me so that you don't get what you wanted, I'm actually helping to create a better society, according to this recent episode of Hidden Brain. Okay, this is just, while we're talking about forgiveness, we should definitely start with the importance of rage. So if you prematurely forgive like you've been taught and you don't make that rage force you to work toward repair, you may be actually depriving yourself and those around you of a very important gift, the gift of your enlightened rage. You know what else is logical to a primate brain? Sometimes what else is logical to a primate brain is shame. And if you've ever heard about Reverend Fajun, he's probably up here all day like, hey, don't shame each other. I said it in this sermon, right? Don't use forgiveness as a shame tactic. But you know, what's really cool is that, again, Homo sapiens would use social shame to keep the order in their primate bands. And so if you have this thing of like, look, I just cannot welcome them back into the fold, I need to ostracize them, and your heart is saying that, that's not bad. That's actually a pro-social instinct inside of you. Okay, it's a monkey instinct. Don't get me wrong, those can easily go haywire, but as an ordained person in a compassionate Buddhist something something and called to the ministry of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Los Gatos, I hereby absolve you from self-shaming for the fact that you are shaming others, because it's actually good if repair needs to take place. Okay, so what is repair? Repair is when someone has taken the steps to change their behavior, to go back and try to make right what was wrong, to go back and try to, show that they are now a trustworthy person. And if that hasn't happened, then it might be, dare I say it, stupid to forgive them. Forgive them. What did I say in bold here that I thought sounded good? If what is needed is behavioral change, going straight to forgiveness is not the answer. Rather, we might want to ask if we've received a real apology, an apology which acknowledges harm and signals that they're willing to take steps to make repair. If we haven't seen actions like that, then this is not a time for what we've been probably taught forgiveness is. It's a time to continue to work toward necessary repair or take protective actions in the meantime, if repair is not available. Whoa. Okay. Let's see. Do you want more? Are we having fun yet? Is it therapeutic? I hope it's a little bit rage therapy or something along those lines. Beautiful. All right. Let's keep going then. Ha ha ha. Closure. The second one that we may be playing with forgiveness, but we actually need is closure. And, well, gosh, if we spoke about the positive qualities of rage and shame, then I suppose I should go all in and talk about the positive benefits of disassociation. That's right, the positive benefits, benign disassociation. And I don't mean this as like you went to your therapist and they said, whoa, I think you're dissociating. Let's work with this. No, I mean, there are certain injuries that have happened at the hands of another, emotional or physical, where it's better for you to not think about those for a while and to just take it off the table entirely. There's good research on this. Abuse, bigger social issues, sometimes it's most helpful to just pretend it didn't happen and get on with your life. A problem happens, though, that sort of good hippies like myself know that to be the case. We know, hey, if you didn't have to think about this all day, you'd be happier. And so we encourage you to forgive and let go so that you can have closure. Premature forgiveness, though, is not equivalent to closure. Premature forgiveness is not equivalent to closure. And if you want to know the problems of it, rewind and listen to the section on repair. Okay, but here I am to let you know that without shaming yourself into, oh, you can't let it go, you need to forgive. You don't have to do that. Just know that you can healthfully disassociate. You can say, I now revoke your real estate in my mind, drop them from your daily thoughts, and not have forgiven at all. As a Buddhist ordained clergy and the call to the ministry, I hereby now free you from any responsibility to offer forgiveness prematurely for need of closure. Just give yourself closure. Okay, there's another meaning we can make out of disassociating, which means stop associating with abusers. You can just also, here, I'm a permissionary today, so just stop associating with them. Disassociate yourself. There is nothing wrong with you. You don't need to forgive and still go to Christmas Eve, eggnog drinking party. Just don't go and hang out. We'll do a Zoom meeting with you instead. Okay, it's gonna be fine. And just get the closure you need. Don't substitute some shame-laden punishment paradigm, dualistic notion of forgiveness, because what you really needed was closure. Just give yourself the closure you needed. The biggest problem here comes from should. Society or our church or our longing tells us that we should be over it. We should be willing and able to let go, and we should drop our resentment. And if we can, and if that's appropriate, we may feel very free. But we have to be honest with ourselves and navigate by our inner guidance, not some arbitrary template imported from outside. Okay, not your grandma's sermon on forgiveness, I hope. But now, let's do the part that my grandma would have liked, the last one, which is compassion. The last aspect is compassion. And let's be very clear, this is a type of forgiveness, quote unquote, forgiveness, which is going to be selfish. Having spoken to you of why you shouldn't forgive, let's now contemplate how forgiveness can be beneficial and how to benefit from it. I'm going to read from my notes so I stay on time. To do this, we need to go a little bit Buddhist for a minute, but don't worry, it's still just that first universalist Unitarian principle of our inherent worth and dignity. You see, what Buddhists believe is that all beings want happiness and to be free from suffering. All of us want happiness and to be free from suffering. Even if we're being self-destructive, we're trying to use that self-destructive behavior to meet some universal human need. We all want happiness and to be free from suffering. But where these Buddhists specialize is they figured out, while we want that, we are very, very bad at getting it. And what they say is that it's because we don't know where happiness and suffering actually come from. We don't know where happiness and suffering actually come from. So we're going to fast forward through 2.5 millennia of philosophy class and 3 or 4 decades of positive psychology, and we can boil it down to this. Deep happiness comes from wishing and working for your own and others' thriving, and inner suffering comes from working for your own or another's harm. Deep happiness comes from wishing and working for your own and others' thriving, and inner suffering comes from working for your own and another's harm. It's really kind of cool. They said, like, here's what your nature is. Like, down at the core of you, what you are is you long for happiness, you want to be free from suffering. If you're working to bring harm to yourself or others, you're working at cross purposes with who you are on your deepest level. And they say that's where all your problems come from, on the deepest level. We know this because the most deeply happy people on planet Earth have a sense or purpose or connection that is larger than their self. On the other hand, when we're grumpy, selfish, or acting out, it's almost always because we're suffering or tense in some way. When we're grumpy, selfish, or acting out, it's almost, we don't do that because we're so stoked. We're so, oh, I love my family. I love planet Earth. I feel like everything's going to be fine. And then we go and like engage in non-pro-social behaviors. No, that's not how it works. When you feel that, you go out and you want to pet dogs and you want to like rescue them from the shelter. And you're like, oh, is there any food drives going on? I think I'll go to a food drive today. You know what we could do? We could clean up the creek. My coffee was so good this morning. I'm overflowing with clean up the creek sentiments. Oh, that's what you do when you feel good. When you feel bad, that's when you're likely to lash out and hurt yourself or another. Okay, so we are often our most magnanimous when we are feeling the most well, And it works vice versa. When we're feeling the least well, we are our least magnanimous, generous, compassionate. So the selfish part, the kind of forgiveness I want to encourage is not the kind where you leave off requirements for accountability, but it is the kind where we merely resolve to let go of resentment. We merely resolve to let go of resentment. Okay, I know, easier said than done, perhaps, but let's define resentment from, again, from Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. A feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at something regarded as a wrong, insult, or injury. Okay, so persistent displeasure, indignant displeasure or persistent ill will. This is what we want to focus on. The persistent ill will part specifically, because ill will means wishing harm on another. And that's where that Buddhist wisdom comes in. It's recognizing that some part of us thinks that if we continue to wish harm on the other person, that fixes the problem. Like there's some deep piece in our brain that says like, oh, if I just keep like wanting them to hurt, that will bring me the repair and the closure that I long for. But I think many of us have been on planet Earth long enough to recognize that just like, have you tried it? Like just hating and wanting people to hurt, and how that just fixes everything, doesn't it? It doesn't. So all this is saying is like, well, let's give up on hurting ourselves with the illusion that that's going to create accountability. This is the ask. Stop hurting yourself with the illusion that that's going to create accountability. Now, one thing that's wonderful, like Archbishop Tutu said in our opening words, is that you can go and work for accountability. You can work really hard, but you don't have to do that with a suboptimal physiology. You don't have to do that working at cross purposes with what you really want. So if we merely give up resentment in the form of persistent ill will, we can actually give ourselves a lot of relief, right? It might be worth it if this persistent ill will helped us fix the problems in our relationship or society, but sadly the punishment paradigm is a flawed one. You cannot harm others into a change of heart. It's true, sometimes suffering does breed empathy. There's good research on that, but there's no guarantee that punishment will breed empathy. You can use force protectively. You can educate someone, but we know through how terrorists and cult members are radicalized, that pain has no educational value of its own. So in knowing this, we can allow ourselves to drop persistent ill will that harms our own physiology selfishly. Just drop giving them the real estate of spending your precious life force energy on hating them, because you know it doesn't do any good anyway. So my pitch to you today is not forgiveness, but a unique form of compassion. It is compassion that lets go of resentment because we are unwilling to let another person be in charge of whether we are healthy or ill inside. We are selfish enough to perhaps stay angry, but to renounce persistent ill will, thoughts of revenge, or inflicting suffering for suffering's sake. Last note, extra credit. If you're able to do that, you may even be moved toward the second aspect of compassion, which is not merely selfish, but recognizes compassion's benefit to another. It's the willingness to let go of wishing harm on those who harmed us, and instead we begin to wish that they would learn. We wish that their capacity to do harm would be blocked. We wish that they would awaken and turn their life around. And on our best days, we might even wish that they find real happiness, because we recognize that they can't be acting the way they're acting or have acted the way they're acted because of how well they are. They can only be acting in those ways because of how ill they are. And when we've let go of the poisons inside, we may start to recognize that we want to get rid of illness in the world altogether. That mental, that inner unwellness that allows us to harm ourselves, or others. We let go of the desire to punish them for punishment's sake. And if we can't, we know that it's impossible to give empathy when we have not received it ourselves. We understand that perhaps this is not the moment for forgiveness, and instead acknowledge our unmet needs for repair. If I've done my job today, I imagine that this type of forgiveness will not seem easy by any means, but it will make sense. It will call us toward what we truly value as UUs, living from the deepest parts of our hearts and into that dream of world community with peace, liberty, and true justice for all.